Let me invite to the stage, and then as you all take your seats again, let me invite to the stage Yuri Lutsenko. Yuri, welcome. Thank you for being here. Come and take Wow. Everything seems to be going just fine, at least according to the video. Let's see if that's true when we start our conversation. Now, Yuri and I have had conversations at YES before. I'm delighted we're going to have another conversation in a moment. But before we begin the question and answer, I know Yuri has just got a few short minutes of opening remarks, and then I'm going to grill him lightly for a while. But Yuri, you start. Off you go.
Good afternoon, Stephen, and all the fellow colleagues. Of course, the reality is different from this short cartoon, but I asked to show this to you for us to remember where we started. To appoint me general prosecutor, the parliament had to amend the law. That wasn't very comfortable for me, and I agreed to that change and to that position because I knew what the general prosecution was. And I remember the Ministry of the Minister of Interior worked where all the cases were destroyed at that time. I remember when I was walked under the chain in the corridors and my son was coming from the questioning and all the prosecutors were saying, that's all right, that's according to the law, and I had to be accountable to allegedly organizing illegally the Day of the Militia. And I know that changing just the general prosecutor is a little drop in the sea. We have changed the system, but now I'd like to say that, of course, we have massive amount of problems. We have achievements. We have turned back $1.5 billion of Yanukovych mafia money. We minimized the problems with business through business ombudsman and other institutions. We have closed dozens of thousands of criminal investigations against rank-and-file people that were faked or vested interest motivated. 2,200 corruption has received the verdicts, and we thought that we could leave that at that, but no. The system is looking for new generation. We need new blood. They're going not to the dragon's cave, but to a normal European workflow. But very often what means is not just the rules, but how they are applied. And that's why we new people. I'm talking about social lifts, when new people will come to the prosecutor office from the very bottom to the very up. It's not like a TV rocket when you know that TV journalists, they go to parliament and then they already off and go to the presidential post. I'm talking about going to the regional, local prosecution office and give the new breath have to new European rules that have to be still there. We are looking forward to these people. We have killed the dragon, and now we need a new, educated, Western-oriented personnel. And my mission will end once these people will come, and they will set the irreversible point, not to go back to these old dangerous times.
Yuri, thank you. Not least, thank you for being brief and concise. That's helpful because we don't have so long for questions. There was an interesting moment in your video which showed, I think they were rats or mice being locked up in cages. I don't know which they were. But anyway, the point is this. You have locked up some people for corruption, officials within public service, also private citizens. But what you have not done, and it's something I've asked you before and you still haven't done it, you haven't locked up any of the quote-unquote big fish, the people that everybody in this room knows are deeply corrupt, have positions of power and influence in this country, maybe because they're very close associates of top politicians, maybe because they run media organizations. Whatever the reason, you have not gone after and convicted these big fish. Why?
Thank you for this question. It's a key one. And on the streets and in the parliament and here, people are asking that question. The answer to that question is very simple, but the practical steps are very difficult. The parliament established a specialized, absolutely autonomous body which will have to catch that big fish. It is called National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, totally independent from prosecutor office, and there is a specialized anti-corruption prosecution which is helping them. I'm the only prosecutor in Europe who has no influence and no control over them. I have neither the right to control, nor to give instructions, nor even to ask to have inquiries in how they deal with that corruption, a category. So my task is to catch those who give bribes up to the level of the deputy governor. Everything higher is NABU's business. Unfortunately, they're still in the process. I hope the next time here there will be NABU and Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office, and they will be able to tell you not about these little rats and mice, but about big fish, big enemies of our budget and of our country that hopefully they will have caught and demonstrated. Maybe not 2,200 as we did, but at least 20. That would be enough. That's something we really do need, and without that, combating corruption is not full-fledged. People will not believe this new governance unless that happens. But I can't influence those fellow colleagues of mine. The only thing I'm always ready in this context is to stretch the hand for cooperation, and we are doing this through the joint prosecution activities and task forces if our fellow colleagues need that support.
You seem to be saying, you know what, it's nothing to do with me, but surely as the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, with the important position and the voice you've got, it is a responsibility of yours to speak out when the anti-corruption machinery of this country clearly is not working and is clearly dysfunctional. And in particular, I would point you to all of the reports we're hearing about the failings in the leadership of the so-called SAPO, the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office. It seems there is complete dysfunction in the relationship between that office and NABU, the Anti-Corruption Bureau. And are you telling me that there is nothing that you and other senior members of the government can do about that?
Well, I will try to pick my words in that context, because I don't want to add oil into the fire, war fire, which is there within this one mechanism, NABU and SAPO. SAP. But I think this is a bit of a, childish disease when people, instead of looking for problems in them, are looking for foes and enemies around. The 2 years everyone became the enemy for those specialized institutions, and now they have switched into the problems between each other. With a person, as a person with experience, because I do have also my prison experience behind the bars, then I always say that you have to come together despite your sympathies or antipathies and do the work together. I hope that I'm successful in that. But another thing, why you are right in what you're saying, that we can't just give the numbers of people who were arrested or prisoners who were caught. Of course, that's very important. That's a piece of important work. But a more important thing is to cut off the sources of corruption, because Ukraine is like a big ship. The inside of it was filled with water totally after the revolution, and just to put in the pump and pump out that water without closing the leaks in the budget, without these opportunities for corruption, takes you nowhere. There would be an endless job that will give no result. So for half a year now, with all my, at all stages, at all places, I'm emphasizing that the government, the parliament, the president and society has to close 3 leaks that are the sources of corruption. If we want to combat corruption, of course, we have to put another 2,000 small and medium fish behind the bars, several hundred big fish. But what is the source? Where they come from? First, of the national size is a huge state-owned sector, 3,500 of state-run enterprises. Nowhere except for China has that. 70% are saying that they are loss-making. They are loss-making, right, Ms. Yareska, but they are also very profitable for all party bosses, for opposition and coalition. Everyone who is in the politics, they are dreaming of appointing state-owned enterprises, the state enterprise, the horses of Ukraine, where there are 4 horses and 4,000 acres or hectares of land, and all the money comes to their pockets. Until we do something with this, that corruption will flood all the political class of Ukraine. Long live big privatization, and it has to be immediate. And 2 other sources. So customs, I won't talk much, Stephen, about that. 30% of customs still doesn't go to the budget, and there has to be a special regime there. That's what the government, I hope, is starting doing. And the third is issues license for subsoil. That's the foundation of all the oligarchy. After Maidan, 772 permissions for oil, gas, sand and granite and amber were auctioned. The rest of it was in the dark room with no light. So long live the auctions. That's the answer to that question. So those 3 sources, very briefly. So these 3 sources could have cracked the corruption atmosphere more than any other statements. I think we need to put those guys behind the bars and to cut off the sources of corruption that are open and obvious to everyone.
Look, I'm not a cynic in that I assume people are lying to me, but I am a skeptic, and I judge people on their actions more than their words. So, you know, whether it be the president of Ukraine or his top ministers or his prosecutor general or whatever, I judge people on action. So let's get specific about one particular action which I know is exercising a lot of people in this country. There is an individual, and I'm going to specify him, the mayor of Kharkiv, who is the subject, has been the subject of a very long-running investigation and very serious charges. In recent weeks, all of the investigation and the charges have been dropped, and nobody in this country seems to understand why. You're the Prosecutor General. I want to get inside your head. I want you to explain to me why, and why people should still have credibility in the system when investigations like that are suddenly dropped. The mayor of Kharkiv, Mr. Kanis.
Indeed, that's a big problem that I publicly called unacceptable, categorically unacceptable. I think that in the court process there was an intervention of politicians. The fact is that the judge, after the litigation, retired the next day. So probably there was a bribe directly, and that bribe was quite big and sizable. I'm launching the criminal investigations for for the illegal decision of that and ruling of that judge, and I'm expecting for the proper decision of the appeal court. Openly and sincerely, which very rarely I can do in terms of my judgment against the court ruling, I will directly say this is illegal court decision and the judge has to be responsible for them. The appeal court has to say its word.
All right, well, I'm sure a lot of people in Ukraine will listen to those words with great interest. We're short of time, so I'm not going to go deeper into that one. I want one other specific case to be put on the table in front of you. I believe that a free media is one of the most important elements of a vibrant, working democracy. I would say that because I'm a journalist, but I think it's very important for Ukraine too. I am extremely disturbed to see that two of your leading investigative journalists in recent days have been required, or are going to be required in the next few days, to hand over their mobile phone records, including all of their GPS movement records, going back for 17 months, because you are pursuing, or it seems the system is pursuing, a leak that is deemed to have come from the office of the head of NABU. And as a result, these journalists are being intimidated. They have become collateral damage. And the message to all journalists and all citizens in Ukraine is that journalists are fair game for the system, and that nobody can believe in a journalist's promise that they will be a protected source, because the government is going to take their mobile phone and look at all of their phone records. That is unacceptable. It is destroying a free media, and what are you going to do about it?
Дякую.
What you described is totally unacceptable, it's true, but the reality is different from what you were talking about, and that's a very important case, and I would like to talk about this for a minute. In the office of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, in a male voice which was in the internet, the secret records of one of the women was made public with the intimate details which are very offensive to the dignity of that woman. She thinks that she was a victim, and she have appealed to the prosecution to find out who made it public, and it became public for the people, the secret records where there were intimate details. She is a plaintiff, and she's a victim, and these were the journalists gathered in Nabu for off-record meeting. Two of them were identified. They refused to give the information. I totally accept that. As a person who derived from journalist circus, I work as a general prosecutor, among others, for the journalists to have the right to protect the information, meaning not to share some information that they wish not to share. That's absolutely acceptable. But in Ukraine, despite the war and the Russian hybrid intervention on TV, we are totally protecting the rights of journalists, even at the times when their thoughts are not liked by the government, and that's why the general prosecutor is there, among others as well. But I have other mandates. I have to investigate and find out who, in violation of the law, disclosed the information which infringes on the dignity of other Ukrainian citizens. And I have the only solution. I just need to find out when did this happen, just the date, when. And we asked the mobile or cell operator only one thing: when did two journalists were on the territory of Nabu, which is serviced by one mobile operation, nothing else. We didn't want not the records, nor text messages, no connections, no other details were required from them. We just need the date of the possible crime. So the balance between the needs of the investigation and protection of the journalist rights is found. It is the minimum intervention in the privacy zone and the privacy of journalists. I think, from my point of view,
just to be clear about this, I happen to have spoken to one of the journalists concerned. She says that as of next week, unless something changes, you are going to insist on getting access to her phone records going back 17 months. Is that true?
Ще раз повторюю,
Again, I will tell you, I will have demonstrated to the members of the parliament, to the head of the line committee, my request of the general prosecution to the cell phone operator, just to indicate the date when these journalists were in the cell that was servicing in the territory of the NABU, nothing else.
You're a former political prisoner, you've known struggle yourself, and you also, I believe, understand the importance of a free media. Do you not see that what you are doing today is incredibly dangerous for the future of journalism, independent journalism, and a free media in this country?
If I had at least one other option of getting the date of that event, I would have never opted for this intrusion in the confidentiality of the journalists. But I'm the general prosecutor who has to investigate and set the date. That's the requirement of the law, to indicate the date. The NABU head can do that because he is giving these nice, tasty quotes for the journalists, but he is then hiding behind their backs when he has to be responsible, when he is called for. That's why I have to do that intrusion to the confidentiality zone, and those journalists are just witnesses, and they will stay witnesses. Neither their talks, nor connections, nor text messages, not that they will be disclosed. They will not even be requested by the general prosecution. We are interested just in the date. This is our job. I can't just reject one person in her right for the protection just because the witnesses were the journalists. I can't just close that case because I don't want to offend journalists. I don't want to, that's true, but that's my job, and I have to take these crimes to the end, and I have to allow my investigators to do this with a minimum intrusion into the fundamental democracy element, which is journalism.
I just want to end with one big thought, and it's about the rule of law in this country, respect for the rule of law, and a belief from the citizens that their government is clean, it's transparent, and that ultimately it's working for them. How far forward do you think Ukraine is today compared, say, with 3-4 years ago? Because I personally am still hearing the same complaints from ordinary Ukrainian people that they still believe their government is, frankly, still riddled with corruption, that too many powerful people are able to use their contacts to avoid justice, and that for all of the promises, the words from the president, from people like yourself, the fancy videos that we began this session with, real change has yet to come to Ukraine.
Так, звичайно,
Yes, of course, it's very popular to say that nothing has changed in Ukraine, but that's not true. It's not the reality. Ukraine is the only country on the European continent where millions of civil servants fill in their disclosure forms. We have many other open database sources in Ukraine. We shed a lot of light to make our government transparent. Is there anything else that can be done? Yes, of course, and we will do that, but only the optimists are changing the world. The pessimists just get mad with any success. Well, I'm actually for those who established the Prozoro system, not those who continue stealing. Well, I'm for the guys, for the young guy who became the mayor of the town of Pokrovsk and switched the city to the green energy by 100%. I'm sure that hero is not who criticized the army, the way they are fed, etc. But Mr. Haidukevich, the journalist, he together with his colleagues developed a new uniform for the Ukrainian army. I'm sure that the new generation has to learn how to work. Yes, just to criticize is very popular. That's what the democracy is for. That's what journalists, people, deputies, opposition, civil society are for. But it's quite often that we who took the responsibility to come to power actually lack something. But let's stop on ground that talks about absence of any change. That just may be an attempt to create the their own political future. I do not trust the people who have been for years civil society activists. They don't understand how they make their money. They should have already taken positions with the government rather than continue criticizing.
One question. If somebody has a question for Yuri, who is all right, we'll go over there just because you've caught my attention, but it's got to be quick because we really need to get to lunch very soon.
It's very quick. Brian Bonner, Chief Editor of the Kyiv Post. Mr. Lutsenko, have you ever thought about going to the United States and studying under Robert Mueller and contrasting his effectiveness with your ineffectiveness? While he's putting people in prison, you are meeting with people like Igor Kolomoisky, who allegedly stole $6 billion from Ukrainians. So people criticize because it looks like you've created a situation where you can only go after little fish. And if that's the case, why don't you transfer 9,000 of your prosecutors over to SAPO and get a credible SAPO so that Ukrainians can finally get justice for once in their lives? Thank you.
Дуже дякую, пане Брайане.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your question. I would like to correct you slightly. We've never had 90,000 people with the prosecutors. We have 9,000 prosecutors, only 1,000 in Kyiv, so I wouldn't talk about these huge numbers of those who allegedly are idling. But in addition to corruption, do you know how many criminal proceedings are there in Ukraine? 1,200,000. We are talking about corruption, but let's talk about the wave of murders, robbers, trafficking in human beings. It's all over our shoulders, with the shoulders of 10,000 prosecutors. Plus, we have a war, and we have a country full of illegal weapons. We still can handle that together with our colleagues from the National Police and this beyond. Sure, yes, American prosecutors have a lot of things to teach me, but first of all, they need to teach me how to get to the effective legislation when there are grounds for to detain the suspect for corruption and to put him to jail and then put him in front of the court. I have to follow the laws developed and adopted by my people's deputies. My question to you is, should I go and learn from Lazarenko case? How many years have they been investigated in the United States? They tell me maybe this year, and Ukraine will get back 170 million stolen by Mr. Lazarenko. Then I will go get this money in the United States. We will discuss other issues, maybe $6 billion placed there by Yanukovych Mafia. I have a lot of topics to discuss with the American prosecutors, but not as a schoolboy who is actually disciplined by the older teachers. I'm actually want to talk as equal to equals because our corruptioners actually use the American system. It's very transparent for the United States, but not transparent for us at all. So I suggest the cooperation to overcome our common problem. The problem related to Putin has become evident to everybody. The common problem of corruption with this international links is also very harmful.
Thank you very much. I would love to continue, but we're out of time. Also, I'm very hungry, I'll be honest, so it is time for lunch, I think. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give Yuri Lutsenko a very warm hand for coming and talking. And it's every year a pleasure to see you, Yuri. Thank you. And before you go, ladies and gentlemen, just a quick word. Lunch is going to be served in the usual lunch and dinner area over in the Arsenal. At 15:45, there's going to be a panel discussion with lunch as well. Then at 15:45 back here, the Nord Stream discussion, the energy discussion is going to take place here in the conference room. And I should also remind you, we have got a special guest this afternoon that you are not going to want to miss. So all of that coming this afternoon, but for now, go and enjoy your lunch.